Kim, it's such a pleasure to have you here, and you do such beautiful work. I think we're all going to be inspired to at least try some of the techniques that you are showing us. Tell us, first of all, what stump work is.
Stump work is a form of surface embroidery that is raised in some way. In fact, originally it was called raised and padded embroidery. And there are a variety of different ways we go about getting the embroidery up off the surface.
Is this different from applique?
You can use applique.
Oh, you
One
can.
of the joys about stump work is that it's sort of like a collage in art. You can use any type of embroidery technique that you happen to like that will give the appearance that you want for the piece that you're working on.
And I noticed that you said you can use any topic. It could be from cartoon characters to the Wild West to whatever. And that's interesting.
Absolutely. A lot of people like to do flowers and insects. I like to do scenes. This happens to have been a little girl I saw who was manning a booth at a farmer's market. And that was the inspiration for that piece. And you can use all kinds of things in stump work that well, whatever you can find. These are actually really large beads that have been wrapped in thread. And then you have regular seed beads. And in traditional stump work, they would do things like use mica for windows when you wanted reflection. You could use shisha mirrors, whatever you can think of to use.
A way to use a lot of little scrap pieces
It
that you
is.
have.
It's a really wonderful excuse for broken bits of jewelry. If you're doing a pirate's chest, a little bit of gold chain and some sequins
That's
for
a good
gold
idea.
coins. Yeah.
Well, now, do we just use the regular embroidery floss that
You
is the
can
only thing
use-
I've worked with?
Well, it works great. You can use regular embroidery floss. You can use rayon threads like you use for Brazilian. You can use silk threads. You can use pearl cotton. It just depends on how thick an appearance that you want.
I see. Okay, so we're going to show how to create something like this.
Exactly.
And one example that you're talking about is the flower. You mentioned flowers.
Yes.
Is this something a beginner could take on doing?
It's probably more of an intermediate technique, but someone like yourself that I know you know have had some experience with basic embroidery stitches. It's just a matter of being patient and building it up.
Well, that's interesting.
It's none of it's particularly difficult or hard to handle. It's just you have to be patient. You go through a lot of layers.
Okay.
Some of the ways that we get it off the surface of the fabric, this is a detached sort of stitch that's bullions. We've often made bullion roses. This is called a detached picot, and it makes a floppy little leaf. And then this is a really fun stitch that is pretty much unique to stump work. It's called raised stem stitch. And it's really good for caterpillars or butterfly bodies or big thick stems.
What about like fences?
Oh yeah.
Would that work?
Anytime you wanted to do something thick. So all you do is you lay horizontal stitches, straight stitches across the width, and then you work a regular stem stitch, row after row after row of it, and it builds up and it gives you this wonderful texture, and it's a little bit raised off the surface.
So there's no rule as to something has to be 1/8 of an inch off the surface up to a half. It's just whatever gives you that three-dimensional feel.
Right, and sometimes you want different thicknesses because, for instance, the little girl's sweater, you want that to come out more than you would her blue jeans because normally when we wear a garment over the top of our jeans, it's a little bit further out. And then her hat, of course, needs to stick out even more to look realistic.
Now, these are flowers?
Well, this was going to be the center of a daisy. So it would be a much larger scale. And this is a technique we call a slip. You just draw whatever shape you want on a piece of fabric. You fill it with whatever embroidery. I chose French knots because I think they're nice for daisies. And then you would cut out around this outline, and this is where the applique that you mentioned comes into play, because then you just applique almost all the way around the shape, and then you stuff it with fiberfill and finish sewing it down, and you get this lovely little dome.
I love it. Yeah, that's nice.
But now if you want even more more raised, you can do layers of felt, and this is the padding that is under the little girl's sweater. You have sort of a milk bone shape, if you will, and for the first layer, and then sort of a smaller sweater, and then finally a piece of felt that is as big as I want the sweater to be. And then this is a technique that is used very frequently in stump work. It's called needle lace. And
Needle lace.
yes,
Okay.
you couch down onto a temporary surface a piece of thread. I've used number 8 pearl cotton here. And then you work row after row after row of buttonhole, except that instead of going through the fabric like we usually would, you just catch the loop of the buttonhole stitch.
Oh, okay. And that makes it removable then.
Right. And then you can go in and clip all these threads and just lift the piece that you've made, which is like a tiny piece of fabric, and you just sew it down so that you end up with an appearance like this.
This looks just like a real sweater.
Yes, I know. Needle lace looks like crocheting and knitting.
And there's different types of doing a raised design.
Absolutely. If you want to have different depths, this is the little cabbage that you see in the farmer's market piece. And I just used interfacing, embroidered over it, and then put a little piece of felt down and embroidered that so that my cabbage is more rounded.
This would be fun. You could make, if you're watching a show on TV or something, you could make a whole bunch, put them in a plastic baggie, and then next time you need a certain
I use
design.
little metal candy boxes to store my
perfect.
pieces in because you don't want to lose them.
No, not after this much work.
Right.
And this is interesting how this little basket, I mean, this looks
Yes.
real.
Well, thank you. It's you have a smaller piece of felt put down first, then the larger piece of felt, and then this was, I believe, number 5 pearl cotton because I wanted that real heavy dimension, and I laid some straight stitches across, and then I couched them down, so I hoped it would look like.
It does. Looks just like a real basket.
And then I took a piece of wire and worked buttonhole stitch over it to make the handle, so the
make the
handle's
handle
completely
More
above the
three-dimensional.
surface.
I see. And what about this piece? It features several different types of stitches.
It does. That I call partridge in a pear tree. I wanted a Christmas decoration, and the bird is stump work. If you can sort of slip your finger under his wing is completely detached, and his tail feathers are those little picots that we talked about before. And because, well, I wanted the piece to work up quickly, I used silk ribbon to put in all the leaves. And because it's Christmas and I like glitter, I put in lots of beads at the base of it.
So you can really get carried away, in other words.
Oh my goodness, yes.
But it does take some patience to do it when you're just beginning. But it's really interesting to see what all, I'm so glad that the handwork, needlework career has been embellished. And lots of people are picking it up.
Right, and one thing that's pretty unique about stump work, you can actually do a piece of embroidery that is completely off the surface because this is more of the needle lace, and then this is a little embroidered leaf, and each piece is created individually and then wired together.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for showing us how these are done. This is enticing. Thank you.
Thank you so much.